Hydropower is one of the longest standing forms of generating electricity, essentially using the potential energy in the difference in water height to be able to generate electricity. Fundamentally, a very well-established, commercially viable technology, but is premised on being able to utilize water or the flow of water to generate electricity. So many European, especially Canada, Norway, huge amounts of hydro energy due to the fact that they have very large rivers, run of water. South Africa, quite different. We are a largely arid country and region in sub-Saharan Africa. So while there is a fair amount of hydro north of our borders, within South Africa, relatively little, and we have largely tapped the resources available to us, including hydro import from Mozambique. But yet we do also have pump storage, which we use as a battery, a water battery, very efficiently and effectively in South Africa, that really helps us in the day-to-day operation of our power system.
Now that you touch on Mozambique, there's that obvious worry because come 2030, they've indicated that they will no longer be supplying. Your views on just that?
I don't have a particular professional view on that. I think when there's opportunities to be able to extend life of plant, be able to enter into further offtake agreements. I mean, hydro and the potential in Mozambique will remain attractive to South Africa at the right pricing. But increasingly, what we would want is more flexible output. So a base load supply from, for example, from Mozambique into the future would be far less valuable to us than the ability to ramp that hydro up and down. So to be able to, for example, get more in the evenings when the solar PV is not producing and in the early mornings. So more flexible hydro going forward will have a lot of value to the South African power system. So perhaps it is Mozambique reinvented as opposed to what we've done in the past.
Dr. Rod, to rope you in here. So it is the oldest source of energy. How does hydroelectric power, though, currently contribute to South Africa's energy mix?
Well, most of it is in the form of a battery or a storage facility. So Eskom has two big pump storage facilities along the Drakensberg escarpment. There are some power generation facilities on the Geriep Dam, for example, on the Geriep River, and one in the Western Cape, and there's about 20 or 30 very tiny ones which are in different states of repair and disrepair, and some working well, some not. So it's a relatively small contribution, and because of the increase in renewable energies and the variations in the supply of renewable energies, we need more pump storage. So there is some talk going on between Eskom and the private sector to build another big pump storage scheme further up the Drakensberg escarpment, but it hasn't yet reached financial investment or final investment decision.
But nevertheless, there's potential for expansion. Brian, as an electrical engineer, what have you found to be the main challenges hindering the development and expansion of hydroelectric projects here in South Africa?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon to the viewers and my fellow panelists. What's critical is what each stakeholder needs to play a role and understand, particularly with the government. They've issued the Integrated Resource Plan, which gives a vision for what needs to be done by 2030. From a policy perspective, that's very good and admirable. And then also from a finance perspective as well. So our banks need to play a part as well in financing some of these projects, specifically for hydro, and also the private sector as well. We saw with solar power and wind power how much private capacity assisted into adding capacity to the grid as a whole. So this multi-stakeholder approach, and each stakeholder knowing exactly how they have to contribute, including the government, including private sector players, and everyone else that is involved, and technology developers as well, and everyone contribute the solutions.
But it sounds as though the financial commitment in the main would be a hindrance currently. Dr. Carter-Brown, what environmental and social considerations are involved in the planning and implementation of hydroelectric projects? Because we know with most, you need to make those considerations around the environment.
Yes, absolutely. And essentially environmental limitations constrain how much pumped hydro or run-of-river we can do in South Africa, it's very, very geographic specific. So in the case of run-of-river, you essentially need to put in a dam an existing river. That typically involves flooding areas that were previously perhaps inhabited, agriculture. So that can have quite substantial and widespread environmental impact on projects. In the case of a pumped hydro storage, where you're effectively using the water as a big water battery, that involves much smaller dams at the head and the footer of that facility with a much lower environmental impact. So it very much depends on the scale of the project, the type of project, but essentially the geographic limitation in terms of large river systems, that effectively limits the number of potential locations in South Africa where we could do these kinds of facilities.
So which are the potential locations if you talk about the geographic limitations?
But essentially, the Drakensberg escarpment has always been an attractive, given the header there and the further development, as Dr. Crompton was mentioning, in terms of a further pump storage scheme. So we do have elements of the Drakensberg and elsewhere where we have the right geology or escarpment to be able to do pumped hydro. Run-of-river, very, very limited further opportunities in South Africa. As Dr. Crompton mentioned, we already have a relatively large number of very small facilities which have been largely accessed. I'm personally not aware of any further large or substantial opportunities for run-of-river hydroelectricity generation in South Africa. I mean, very different if you go north of our borders and to the likes of Congo, where, through their river networks and what they have locally available in resources, very, very different. South Africa, unfortunately, not much further opportunity for substantial run-of-river hydro, but there is further opportunity for pumped hydro storage.
Dr. Rod, the question that many would want to have answers is, what are the comparative advantages and disadvantages of hydroelectric power compared to the other renewable energy sources, be it your solar and wind that many are speaking of currently?
Well, the advantage is that it's renewable and so-called clean. The disadvantage in South Africa is that we're a dry country. We don't have the big rivers. And where we do have big rivers, they have quite big seasonal changes between the wet season and the low season. We also have periods of protracted drought. And we are told that with climate change, South Africa is going to get drier. So you just have to ask yourself, where are the big rivers? And you can't see them. So hydroelectric power is not really a big promise. It doesn't hold a lot of promise, in my opinion, for South Africa. There is promise to use it as a battery, where you put water in a dam at the top of the hill and another dam at the bottom of the hill, and you generate the power by letting the water flow from the top dam to the bottom dam. But for run-of-river and other new sources, they aren't really there. There are a number of small rivers where you could get small little power stations going perhaps, but not really going to move the needle in a significant way for South Africa's power generation. So I think it's largely, unfortunately for us, it's a bit of a cul-de-sac. I think we've done most of what we can do, and there's not much more that can be done.
But I suppose it provides clarity for those that had criticized to say there's great opportunity here. Why is the country not harnessing this specific form of energy? Brian, your views on this. Are there advantages if we have heard what climate experts have said over a period of time now that it is going to become drier?
Yeah, no, very unfortunate. I mean, the link to climate change, we see what's happening in the recent past. I mean, all of the flooding, weather patterns being abnormal. So there's definitely an advantage to going for renewable energy, specifically hydro. But as Roderick and Clinton have said, we are a dry country. We're water scarce region. But yeah, it's worth considering. I think Clinton did mention there were talks with the Congo, but the disadvantages of the transmission line, a project with Congo would have to go through Angola and MosaBeek, and that would cost about 80 billion pounds, which is about 1.4 trillion rand to get a project of that magnitude running and supplying South Africa. The World Bank had made a commitment initially on providing finance for these projects from Congo, but ever since talks have stalled. But hopefully in the near future, talks could start up again, and that project would significantly add about 2,500 megawatts of power were earmarked actually to contribute to South Africa's hydro contribution with the project with Congo. So let's see in the near future.
But at what cost, as you state? I mean, 2,500 is what we're hearing now with the energy minister, that he's actually looking to expedite the procuring of 2,500 megawatts, but this will be from nuclear. So if we were going to get it from hydro, at what cost?
Yeah. As I said, initial research estimates were at about 80 billion pounds, which is a significant investment. There were talks with, international funders such as the World Bank, and maybe even other banks can be roped in as well and see if that can assist as well. But increasing debt as well, countries tend to be reluctant as well in adding so much debt to their balance sheets. But if the projects are implemented properly and the operations and maintenance are done correctly, you can eventually see those debts being paid off. If the assets are managed by the competent right people, that will be allow for those revenues to pay back the debt should the investment.
Now
certainly, yeah.
Pardon me for interjecting there, but now that you mention the whole debt conversation, Dr. Carter-Brown, to bring it to you around the financial implications of a just transition. It's inevitable, we must transition to cleaner energy, but there's the whole debate around whether there should be grants or there should be loans. Your views on just this debate?
Well, I think this debate would have been principally different 10 years ago, when the price of new electricity generation would have been the cleanest and fastest way through the likes of nuclear and coal. I mean, there have been fundamental shifts globally in terms of the pricing of alternatives, wind and PV especially, and also emerging energy storage. And given our large landmass, our excellent solar and wind resource in South Africa, we're very, very fortunate in that we could supply all of our energy needs, or the vast majority, through renewable energy, predominantly wind and PV. And, the studies that have been historically when I was at the CSIR and by a number of independent research and academic and NGO organizations all confirm, as is also evident in the draft integrated resource plan of the government, that the cheapest form of energy going forward will be a combination of wind, PV, and energy storage, which means that, but that is not going to be an overnight transition. So, we do have a large coal fleet, and that needs to be transitioned in a very carefully, well-coordinated, technical, economic, and social way. And hence this whole construct around requiring a just transition, so that we understand the implications on communities. But for the South African economy and the opportunities, there's a lot of upside in terms of a conversion to renewable energy. But there's also a lot of fear and some, and concerns, in terms of it being done in a just way, and understandably so. But by and large, huge, massive opportunity for the country. And we've seen the new minister in terms of electricity and energy also affirming the need to accelerate the implementation of renewable energy in South Africa.
But Dr. Carter-Brown, what of the critics that say this is intermittent energy? If you're talking about wind and solar, it's not as reliable as our base load, your coal, or even to have nuclear as a bigger plant.
That has also been independently verified through a number of studies done by CSR and others in terms of understanding the dynamic or the variable nature in terms of wind and PV. So wind and PV alone cannot be entirely relied on to meet all of the energy requirements 24/7, which is why it's always complemented with other energy sources and storage devices like batteries, like pumped hydro storage, and gas to power. So the overall, we call it a symphony of power the entire power system with all these different elements comes together and ensures that we can supply energy 24/7, the supposed or the term baseload power. So yes, absolutely, those technologies can do it when combined with other technologies, and that blend of technologies gives us the best deal for South Africa. It gives us the lowest price energy, the least CO2 footprint, the lowest water usage, and of course makes our exported products into Europe and other developed economies more cost effective, given the increasing threat of carbon tax and the implications for us. So a lot of concerns in terms of the energy transition, because of course this does have big implications for, in particular, the coal-fired power stations in the regions of South Africa that have understandably been dependent on the mining of coal as a source of economic activity. So that needs to be very carefully managed. But this transition is inevitable. It's already happening on some scale, but it's actually a massive opportunity for South Africa.
And I'm sure many will buy into the symphony of power that you speak of, because it will ultimately lead to cleaner energy. Gentlemen, thank you very much to the three of you.